Under the pale autumn sky of Sanandaj, President Masoud Pezeshkian stood before a crowd that was unusually quiet for a public event. The air itself felt heavy, dry, thin and brittle, like a reminder of what the president was about to say. Iran, long accustomed to cycles of drought and abundance, was now facing a crisis so severe that even its capital, Tehran, might soon become uninhabitable. His words, though simple, carried the weight of an approaching catastrophe. He spoke plainly: if it doesn't rain, we'll have to start rationing water in Tehran between late November and early December. Even if we do ration it and it still doesn't rain by then, we'll run out of water, we'll have to evacuate Tehran. Those few sentences, delivered in Farsi, echoed across the courtyard like a warning bell. For decades, Iran's cities have struggled under the strain of erratic rainfall, poor water management and rising temperatures. But never before had an Iranian president publicly uttered the possibility of evacuating the capital, a city of nearly 9 million people, because it might simply run dry. Across Iran, the signs of crisis are visible to anyone who looks closely enough. Reservoirs that once mirrored mountain peaks have shrunk into cracked basins. In rural Kurdistan province, streams that once fed orchards are now dust-filled channels. Farmers have been forced to abandon centuries-old agricultural traditions, turning instead to deep wells that reach for what remains of underground aquifers, reserves that experts warn could take centuries to replenish. The president's visit to Sanandaj wasn't accidental. It is one of the regions hardest hit by drought this year and a symbol of what's to come for the rest of the country. Standing before local officials, Pezeshkian acknowledged that Iran's water crisis is not just an environmental challenge, but a matter of national survival. He emphasized that climate patterns have shifted dramatically, leaving Iran drier and hotter than at any point in recent memory. Scientists within Iran's own meteorological agency have warned that rainfall has decreased by nearly 25% over the past 2 decades, while demand for water driven by agriculture, urbanization and population growth continues to rise. The tension between Iran's urban centers and rural heartlands is deepening. In Tehran, where millions depend on the Karaj and La dams, water levels have fallen to historic lows. The government has begun installing digital meters on large apartment complexes to monitor consumption, while local municipalities have quietly started drawing up emergency plans for rationing. But in the provinces, frustration is boiling over. Farmers in Isfahan, Yazd and Kerman have staged protests over the diversion of water to cities. In some towns, demonstrators have clashed with police, accusing authorities of favouring industrial projects over rural livelihoods. Environmental experts in Iran say the crisis is decades in the making. The construction of thousands of small dams, combined with the over-extraction of groundwater and the cultivation of water-intensive crops like pistachios and wheat, has pushed ecosystems past their breaking point. Mismanagement has played as big a role as the weather itself. Many Iranians recall how former governments treated droughts as temporary setbacks rather than a structural challenge. The result is now painfully clear. Rivers like the Zayandeh Rud have vanished. Lake Urmia, once the largest saltwater lake in the Middle East, has shrunk to less than 5% of its original size. And villages across central Iran are emptying out. President Pezeshkian's warning was both political and personal. As a former heart surgeon turned reformist leader, he's known for his candid, sometimes unsparing tone. He did not shy away from holding his own administration accountable. This is not just a test of patience, he said earlier in his speech. It is a test of planning and honesty. Those words resonated deeply in a nation where decades of economic sanctions and internal mismanagement have compounded every natural disaster. Iran's water crisis, however, cannot be separated from the global climate picture. The Middle East is warming faster than the global average, and Iran sits at the heart of that transformation. Scientists estimate that if current trends continue, average temperatures in Iran could rise by 2.5 degrees Celsius by mid-century, dramatically increasing the likelihood of droughts, sandstorms and desertification. Already, cities like Ahvaz and Yazd experience summer temperatures above 50 degrees Celsius. In some areas, the soil has turned to powder, carried by the wind into blinding dust storms that choke entire towns. Yet, amid this bleak outlook, Pezeshkian's message was not one of surrender. He called for a national resilience plan, a program to modernize irrigation systems, shift industries away from water-intensive production, and invest in wastewater recycling. He appealed to Iran's universities and scientists to bring innovation into the country's water management. His tone was both urgent and hopeful, the recognition that Iran must adapt or it will perish. In Tehran, meanwhile, the response was mixed. On social media, some Iranians mocked the president's remark about evacuation, calling it political theatre. Others took it as a grim truth long denied. He's right, one Tehran resident wrote on X. Every summer, we turn on the tap and wait for the air to clear before water arrives. Imagine that multiplied by 10 million. Satellite data from the European Space Agency shows groundwater depletion around Tehran accelerating faster than in any other Middle Eastern capital. In some districts, land subsidence has reached 25 centimetres per year. The ground is literally sinking as aquifers collapse. The government has already begun quiet preparations for emergency measures. Officials at Iran's energy ministry have reportedly drawn up a three-stage rationing plan. First, reducing industrial usage, then limiting domestic supply in selected neighbourhoods, and finally imposing citywide restrictions if rainfall remains absent. Hospitals, schools and key government buildings have been ordered to install backup tanks. There are even contingency studies on how to relocate populations in case of an extreme shortfall, something Iran has never had to consider in modern history. The irony is that Iran's energy sector, long a source of national pride, is now part of the problem. Thermal power plants require massive amounts of water for cooling. With many dams operating below capacity, some plants have been forced to reduce output. Rolling blackouts are expected to return in the coming months, a double blow to households already dealing with water stress. For the international community, Pezeshkian's statement is a reminder that climate instability in the Middle East is no longer a distant threat, but an immediate geopolitical issue. Water scarcity is already shaping Iran's foreign policy, from disputes over the Helmand River with Afghanistan to joint dam projects with Iraq and discussions with Russia about large-scale desalination technology. Tehran is also looking to China for hydrological cooperation under the 25-year strategic partnership signed in 2021. But those plans will take years, if not decades, to bear fruit. Inside Iran, the social implications are growing clearer. Migration from rural to urban areas has accelerated dramatically, straining city infrastructures. Sociologists warn of environmental displacement, a slow-motion crisis in which entire communities move not because of war or politics, but because their wells have gone dry. In southern provinces like Khuzestan and Hormozgan, where heat and humidity make survival even harder, protests have already erupted over water cuts. Authorities have responded with promises of new pipelines, but trust in such pledges is low. For President Pezeshkian, who came to power on promises of reform and transparency, the drought presents both a test and an opportunity. He has positioned himself as a pragmatic voice between Iran's hardliners and reformists, focusing on governance rather than ideology. His decision to speak openly about the possibility of evacuating Tehran is being seen by some analysts as an act of political courage, acknowledging an uncomfortable reality that previous administrations ignored. Others, however, see it as an act of desperation, signaling the scale of Iran's environmental collapse. Behind closed doors, the Iranian cabinet has reportedly debated several emergency proposals, including expanding desalination plants on the Persian Gulf, transferring water from the Caspian Sea, and even cloud seeding, a controversial practice of artificially inducing rainfall. But experts caution that such measures are temporary fixes. The real challenge lies in restructuring Iran's water economy, changing agricultural incentives, enforcing conservation laws, and addressing urban consumption patterns. Without these reforms, they warn, Tehran's taps will eventually run dry, no matter how much it rains. As Pezeshkian left Sanandaj, the city's outskirts were veiled in a pale haze of dust. The mountains that once fed its rivers now looked barren and brittle. Children played near an empty canal, their laughter carried by the wind, a haunting reminder of what might soon vanish. In his closing remarks, the president turned philosophical. This country has survived empires, wars, and sanctions, he said, but no nation can survive without water. His words were not mere rhetoric. Across the Middle East, from Iraq to Jordan and Syria, the same story is unfolding: rivers retreating, farmlands dying, populations moving. But in Iran, the scale and urgency are now impossible to ignore. Tehran, a city once built at the foot of snow-fed mountains, is staring at a future where the snow no longer comes. And as the president warned, if the skies remain silent by year's end, millions may soon face the unthinkable, leaving their capital behind, not because of war or politics, but because nature itself has withdrawn its mercy.